All right, let's jump right in. Back in 1964, a pretty radical book came out by a mathematician and architect named Christopher Alexander. And it asks this question that honestly still kind of haunts us today. It taps into a feeling we've all had, even if we can't quite find the words for it.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Think about an old, worn hammer that just feels like an extension of your arm, or a winding village path that feels like it grew right out of the ground. These things just feel correct. And then you have so much of our modern world, confusing software, awkward public spaces, gadgets that are just way too complicated. And it all feels so arbitrary, so irritating. Alexander didn't just notice this. He wanted to know why. What's the secret we lost for making things that truly fit our lives?
He basically framed this as a battle between good fit and bad fit. On one side, you've got good fit. Think of an African mud hut. He loved this example for what he called its powerful sense of adequacy. It's just perfectly tuned to its world. On the other side, you've got bad fit. And that's so much of modern design, where it feels like a bunch of separate ideas were just smashed together, creating this disjointed mess that just doesn't feel right.
And this led him to his big idea: goodness of fit. The whole point is that you can't just look at an object, what he calls a form, by itself. You have to see it as a package deal with its context. That's the world it lives in, the needs, the culture, all the forces acting on it. So good design isn't really about making a beautiful object. It's about achieving this frictionless harmony between the thing and its world.
Okay, so where did that amazing good fit come from? For Alexander, the answer was buried in the past, in what he called unself-conscious cultures. These were societies where people built things based on deep, ingrained tradition, not from some fancy blueprint or theory.
And the process was just brilliant in its simplicity. First off, the feedback loop was instant. If an Eskimo's igloo got a bit too warm and started to melt, he'd just poke a hole in the roof to cool it down, right then and there. The person with the problem and the person with the solution were the same person. Second, change happened slowly, bit by bit, over generations of trial and error. And finally, tradition was this incredible stabilizer. Myths, rituals, they weren't just stories. They were like a cultural memory bank that locked in the stuff that worked and prevented people from making random changes that would just mess things up.
And here's a really key insight. In this whole system, you didn't need a genius designer. The person making the thing was just an agent in the process. Their job wasn't to dream up a brilliant new design, but just to spot a failure, what Alexander calls a misfit, and make one small correction. The system itself, over time, would do the heavy lifting and find its way to a perfect fit. But, that old way, that unself-conscious process, it's pretty much gone. We now live in a self-conscious culture. We analyze everything. We have theories. We teach design in schools as this formal thing. And according to Alexander, this is exactly where all the trouble begins.
Because once tradition faded away, the individual designer was born. And suddenly, this one person sitting at a desk is expected to figure out in a few hours what used to take entire cultures, centuries of slow, gradual adaptation to get right. It's like, as Alexander put it, the burden of 1,000 years falls heavily on one man's shoulders. No pressure, right?
I mean, just take a simple tea kettle. It's got to be cheap, but it also can't rust. It needs to keep the water hot, but it also has to be safe to pick up. It needs to pour without dribbling everywhere, but it also has to be easy to store. Trying to juggle all of those competing demands in your head at the same time, it's just completely overwhelming.
So, what does a designer do? What would any of us do when we're faced with that kind of tangled mess? We take a shortcut. We invent concepts, right? We lump all those little requirements into big, manageable categories we can actually think about, like safety, or economics, or aesthetics.
And boom, that's the trap. Because those concepts, those neat little boxes, they're made up for our convenience. They don't actually reflect how the problem is structured in the real world. The real problem is a tangled web of connections, and our convenient concepts just slice right through those connections, totally distorting our picture of the problem and leading us to create things that just don't fit.
Alexander had this great analogy for it. He said the modern designer is like a kid with one of those sealed glass puzzles, They're just shaking the whole thing, hoping all the tiny little pieces will magically fall into the right slots all at once. The odds of that actually working are, pretty much zero. Okay, so that sounds pretty bleak, but he doesn't just leave us there, stranded. He actually proposes a new, really rigorous method. It's not about throwing away our reason or intuition, but about giving it a solid foundation to stand on, a way to see the true structure of the problem.
So, this is the problem as the designer first sees it. It's just a total mess, a chaotic web of competing demands. All those tea kettle requirements are in there, pulling against each other. You try to fix one thing over here, and you accidentally break 3 other things over there. It feels totally impossible.
So how do you untangle that knot? Alexander laid out this radical 3-step plan. First, you list every single possible way the design could fail, every potential misfit. For one project, designing an Indian village, his team came up with 141 of them. Next, and this is the tedious part, you map out all the interactions, which misfits affect which other misfits. Finally, you use a mathematical process to analyze that big map and find the real subproblems, the little clusters of issues that are all tangled up with each other, but mostly separate from all the other clusters.
And when you do that, what you get is amazing. It's the same list of requirements, but now the hidden structure is revealed. The tangled mess is gone. Instead of your made-up concepts like safety, you can actually see the problem's natural components. You see which issues can be solved together, as a unit, without wrecking everything else.
This new, organized picture of the problem becomes what he calls a program. It's essentially a roadmap. It guides the designer, turning one giant, impossible problem into a logical sequence of smaller, totally solvable ones. You just tackle them one by one.
Now, this whole method is about so much more than just designing buildings or tea kettles. It really gets at the heart of what it means to solve any complex problem.
Towards the end of the book, he says this. He talks about a deep, structural correspondence between the pattern of a problem and the process of designing a form. What he means is the way you try to solve a problem has to match the actual shape of that problem. The old, unself-conscious process did this naturally. We modern, self-conscious designers have to do it on purpose. And this changes the whole goal of design. A truly great design doesn't just work. It actually reveals the true nature of the problem it's solving. Think about the airfoil wing of an airplane. It made flight possible long before we had a perfect theory of aerodynamics to explain it. The form itself helped us understand the problem better. A great solution actually clarifies the question.
So, think about the world today, with all our huge, complex challenges, from climate change to social policy. We're always obsessed with finding the right answers, the silver bullet solutions. But maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing. What if the real key, the real breakthrough, doesn't come from finding a more clever solution, but from first taking the time to draw a more honest, more accurate picture of the problem itself?